Hello and welcome back. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. Today I have another gun store vlog for you where today we will be talking about the top 5 most common firearm types or categories of firearms that I typically have the hardest time making a deal on with my customers when they either bring them into my store or put them onto our website for an offer request. I'm also going to talk about some of the reasons as to why I think there is often a disagreement between myself, the person making an offer on the firearm, and the customer, the people who own the firearm, when it comes to trying to come together on a price for their firearm trade-ins or sales. So if that sounds interesting to you, please stick around. That's coming up now. Okay guys, so jumping into this video, first of all, I've had a retail gun store here for about 8 years, 7.5, 8 years. I've also had my online retail site, WeBuyGuns.com, for just short of 1 year. And between the two outlets, I've purchased from people maybe somewhere around 8,000 to 10,000 firearms, whether through single individual purchases or collections or estates. Through my website alone, again, which hasn't even been up for a full year, we've actually closing in on about 1,000 firearms purchased over our website. So that's hugely successful, and thank you guys for that. But what it has given me is a lot of insight, as I have purchased lots of firearms from people. If I've purchased 8,000, I've made offers on many more than that. So I've seen a huge array of firearms, and there are 5 types of firearms that stick out to me as the 5 most common that I'm not able to typically make a deal on, usually because the customer who brings it in obviously values that firearm a lot higher than I do, which is typically the reason why you don't make a deal when you're trying to negotiate a price. And I've been thinking about that, and I wanted to talk about those 5 types of categories, talk about why I think there is a difference there, and also if you own one of these firearms that fit into one of these types of categories, or you're thinking about purchasing one that fits into one of these category types, it might give you something to think about as to how the resale value might be if you look to go and sell it down the road. Also, if you own a gun store or work at one, I would be interested to see your feedback down in the description or down in the comment section to see if you guys generally agree with these 5 category types, if you have a similar type of track record with them, or if in your area these actually sell really well, but there's others that don't. Leave that down below for my own education as well as for my viewers. So with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into this list. Okay, the first category I have on the list is colored firearms. Now, I'm not talking about flat dark earth or OD green or like urban gray, the so-and-so, sort of militaresque or combat coloration, camouflage coloration. I'm talking about things more like hot pink, lime green, red, purple, things like that, which typically serve, in my opinion, 2 markets. One is the female-oriented market, and one is sort of the novelty collector-oriented market. Now, some of the areas that we see this popularly is, if you guys remember about 10 years ago, the zombie craze, a lot of different companies were putting out like lime green firearms, which again were sort of like gags to sort of just be sort of a joke in that sort of zombie craze era. There was ammunition called zombie killer ammunition. It was like critical defense with the green instead of the red inserts into the hollow point round. There's also a lot of color firearms in colors like very light blue or purple or pink that are obviously meant to serve towards a female market. But in either regard, the markets in both of those aspects are very narrow when we're talking about the general firearms market at large. I also find if we talk specifically about the female market, locally in my store, female purchasers make up probably less than 10% of customers who come into my store or purchase firearms from us. And of that less than 10%, I would probably say 1 in 3 that come in my store are actually interested in looking at a firearm that's pink or purple or blue or anything like that. They typically gravitate towards the standard color, the all black, the bitone with the stainless slide, or things like that. It's actually, in fact, it's funny, the pink and purple firearms that we have sold the most of have generally been to men who are purchasing it for their wife or girlfriend. So I'm wondering if the marketing aspect out of that, or the decision to make those pink and purple or light blue firearms, is more directed by men than it is women. So it's just an interesting topic to sort of think about. And women, if you're watching, leave your thoughts down below. If you generally like those colors, if those appeal to you or they don't, that would also be an interesting point of conversation. But generally, if we have something like an LCP2 that's in a bright pink frame, or we have an LCP2 that's in a black frame, undoubtedly we will sell 10 black frame LCP2s at, in the same time it takes us to sell one pink one if we have them priced the same way. If we price it low enough to where people might overlook the fact that it's a pink frame, maybe, I'd rather have black, but if I'm paying $100 less, I'll go with the pink one. Or I can Cerakote it or spray paint it, I'm willing to do that to save $100. That's when those start to move a little bit quicker. Keep in mind, we at gun stores, when we purchase firearms, it's not just the upfront cost of purchasing the item. We also have to factor in how long is it going to sit on the shelf and take up space. How many customers am I going to have to show this to before it sells? Because, we're paying for my time or for an employee's time. If we have to show this firearm to 6 different people, that might add up to over an hour of customer interactions. Again, you're paying for that time. You generally want things that move fast so you can get new inventory on the shelf, and so you're spending less time having to market and sell the firearm, or if you're having to put it on GunBroker or an online source, take photos, write descriptions. So all of that plays into an offer, because if it's something we know that's going to sell fast, we can sort of mentally put in less value or less cost in terms of time to market and sell the item. Things that are going to sit forever, we're going to be less aggressive on, so we can mark them really low and get them out the door faster. And that's typically the case when it comes to colored firearms, at least in my opinion. Next is going to be commemorative firearms. So you typically see these in Colt and Smith & Wesson. Smith & Wesson likes to do like police commemorative, like you might see Alaskan Highway Patrol commemorative 686, or maybe a Colt World War II commemorative 1911, or an NRA commemorative Winchester Model 94. Now, I typically find that if you take 2 exact models, say it's a Series 70 Colt 1911 45 government size, that's World War II commemorative, and you take the exact same firearm, same finish type, that's not World War II commemorative, just a general shooter, I typically find that the commemoratives usually sell at the same price, if not maybe even a little bit less. The more focused the commemorative is, like if it's Alaska Highway Patrol, 686 commemorative, that's going to serve a very, very narrow group of people who have any type of affiliation or want to collect memorabilia from that type of, whatever it's commemorating. So you narrow the market of people who might be interested. You definitely cannot charge more for that commemorative piece when you're in such a narrow market, because then you're spending all your time waiting for one of those rare people to come through, especially if I'm in a gun store in Indiana. Very few, supporters of the Alaska Highway Patrol are going to come in looking for a commemorative Alaskan revolver. So again, your market's really narrow, so in order to try and move that stuff more quickly, you're going to want to price it low enough to where people are just like, well, it's still a 686 and it's cheaper than the one over there that's not a commemorative, so I'll look past the fact that I don't really have any affiliation with the Alaskan Highway Patrol. I'll go ahead and buy it to take it out, enjoy, and shoot it. Another thing, too, is the commemoratives, a lot of people sort of in the back of their mind have reservations about taking them out and shooting them, fearing that they're going to hurt their value by wearing it out, when they're really built and designed to be a commemorative showpiece, something you put in a shadow box and hang on a wall, which also tends to shy people away from the firearm unless they have more of a personal connection to what it is commemorating, which is always a narrower market. Now, a lot of people, when they put those things on my website or bring them into the store, they always like to make a big deal out of the fact that it's usually marked on the firearm itself or on a presentation case, serial number 251 of 500. Okay, again, I'm going to use the Highway Alaskan Patrol, State Patrol or Highway Patrol example. If the firearm is 251 of 500 and only 500 were made, that means Smith & Wesson assessed that there was probably a market of 500 people for the revolver. If it was a revolver that would be appealing to 50,000 people, they wouldn't make it a short run like that. They wouldn't make it so isolated and narrow, and they are using the fact that very few of them were made to market the firearm to those people who might be interested in purchasing it. So again, for that reason, commemoratives, I think people always place a lot more value on them than it is easy for us to be able to resell and get that value when we're trying to resell the firearm. So when people bring in commemoratives, I typically have a really hard time making a deal for those reasons. Okay, the next category, and probably the most common, would be high-end custom AR-15s. Now, when it comes to building AR-15s, it is something that a lot of people like to do, and it's so easy to do from home with a few tools and a manual or a YouTube video for those that are still out there on how to build AR-15s. I know I've built at least 9 myself. Typically, the ones I've built have been like Vietnam parts kits that I've built into like M16A1 clones and stuff like that. I have videos on those you guys can go watch, but it is a lot of fun. The problem is, when you build any type of AR-15, you're going to get very little back, pennies on the dollar, compared to the parts you've put into it, and that is especially true the higher end you go. Now, if you're getting an Anderson build or a Palmetto State Armory build and you're putting about $500 into it, you can recoup most of that money because you're at such an entry-level small part at the bottom end of the market, to where, you know, okay, if you're competing with a used M&P 15 or Ruger AR-556, like, we make offers, like a home-built PSA or Anderson, we'll make offers consistent with what we're going to offer on a used AR-556 or M&P 15. Where we start to lose people is in the super high end of AR building. That's like, you know, they're using, Geisley triggers, and they're putting EOTechs or ACOGs on top of it, and they're running, nickel boron bolt carrier groups, and, the most premium stuff that's out there on the market, and they're putting $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 into these rifles. It's really hard for us to then purchase that at a fair retail offer or wholesale offer against what you paid for those parts to assemble, to then convince a buyer to come in and purchase. A lot of those buyers that are up at that $2,000, $3,000 mark of the AR-15 market, if we have to explain to the customer what's in this that justifies the high price tag, if they're new to the AR market, none of those names are going to mean much to them anyway. And if they are really into the AR market, then they're probably more likely going to want to, especially if they want a custom build, they're going to take that $2,000 or $3,000 and they're going to build their own firearm that meets their needs. Because there is such a wide array of different things that you can do with an AR-15, whether it's your furniture, your barrel length, the color, everything, the sights, the optic. It's going to be rare to find that person who wants the firearm built exactly to how you built it. So when we price that firearm, we have to price it in such a way that it catches a customer's attention who knows about high-end AR-15 parts and thinks, wow, this has this barrel and this optic and this billet lower and this Geisley trigger and these backup sights, and they're kind of computing in their head and thinking, wow, that's $3,000 worth of parts I can get for $2,000. I'm going to go ahead and do it. Maybe I'll use half these parts and do a different build, and I'll use the other half these parts and do another build. And they're sort of thinking that way. But if it's $3,000 worth of parts and they're about to drop $2,700 on it, they're thinking more to themselves, well, if I'm going to spend all that money on it anyway, I'll just go buy the parts I want and build the gun the way I want it. So that's really hard. Again, when people bring in really high-end stuff like that with high-end optics on it, we rarely make a deal on them for those reasons. It's really hard for us to resell that stuff. Now, we could take that high-end firearm and strip it down to all its components and sell everything separately, but now we're faced with the work it takes to move 15 individual parts to get our money back out of it, which again takes up a lot of space and a lot of our salespeople time to try and sell and market those 15 different parts to 15 different customers. Again, it costs us time and money to do that, so that's going to be reflective in an offer. Now, for that reason too, a lot of times I get asked by first-time buyers if they should build their AR-15 or buy one off the shelf. 100% of the time, a brand name that people recognize, if we go to resell it, it's going to be way easier for us to market that firearm to a new buyer than somebody else's home build. They don't know who you are, they don't know your skill level and how you put it together, they don't know what it looks like internally, they don't have a company they can go talk to if they have issues with a firearm. So again, I always sort of steer first-timers into the direction of purchasing a brand name firearm already built, so that if they decide they don't like the firearm and they want to go sell it back, they're not going to take as much of a bath on the resale of the firearm that they would have had they spent all the money on the parts and the tools, put it together, and then try to resell it. So that's just something else to throw out there and something to consider if you are thinking about whether you want to purchase a brand name already built AR-15 or build your own. If resale value isn't important to you, if you're the type of person who never sells anything back and you know that you really want the AR-15, by all means, I Again, I personally enjoy building AR-15s. There's a lot to learn from doing that. It's really the best way to get familiar with the weapon system and how to use it and what's all there and involved. And it's just an enjoyable process. So I definitely recommend that too if resale is not a concern to you. Okay, the next one sort of goes into what I just talked about, but this is generally customized and heavily modified firearms. So another one, when somebody brings in like a Glock 19 that's been Cerakoted, the sights have been replaced with like high profile night sights, they've dropped in a new barrel that's been threaded, they maybe put some like decals on the slide, they've got like 15 magazines, all that have extended base plates on it, they added in large magazine release and slide release on it, and they put in a steel guide rod. And I'm looking at this Glock 19 that they originally paid $500 for, and there's like $700 in parts, you know, putting them $1,200 into the gun. I know we're not going to make a deal. Again, it's for the same reason with the customized AR-15s. I can't, you know, purchase that firearm and sell it for $1,000 because it's going to take the special one person to come through the door to see that firearm that's been heavily modified to the way you liked it and want to also purchase or invest in all of those modifications. If they're going to spend the money anyway, most people would probably just buy their own Glock 19 and mod it out to the color they want and the sights they want and the internals they want and the trigger they want, rather than somebody else's vision of how the Glock 19 should be modified. This also comes with like excessive amounts of magazines and holsters. You know, often we'll get people who bring in, you know, a firearm with 8 magazines and like 3 different holsters. Again, those holsters might not be something that a new buyer is interested in, or the new buyer might only want 4 magazines, but I have to now force them to buy 8 because that's included with the firearm. So my option is make it so inexpensive that they're willing to buy the whole package because there's so much value there for them, or to part out all your mags and holsters, which now gives me 15 different items I have to market and sell, which again is very time consuming and takes up a lot of shop space. So usually when people bring in those heavily modified things, we don't typically make a deal. I generally, no matter how modified it is or, you know, how many magazines come with it, I mainly just value the gun as if it were stock. I might throw a little bit of additional value into that sort of stuff, but it's not going to be a lot, and it will be pennies on the dollar for what you paid for it. That's why if you're marketing something like that that's been heavily modified, maybe you have an optic on it or a flashlight or a laser or 3 holsters or 10 magazines, the best thing to do is to get it back to stock as original as you can, and then worry about selling all those other parts separately. That's most likely how you're going to maximize all that. I know that's true in the car world too. If you have a highly modified Mustang, you put a new exhaust system or a short throw shifter in there or something like that, when they go to look at your car for resale, they're not going to put a lot of stock into those aftermarket modifications. You yourself are going to eat a lot of that. If you're going to put it into the gun, there's just not going to be a lot of resale value out of it. So the last category would be modified historic firearms. And what I mean by that is things that have been like a re-blued Luger that's been, you know, re-serialized to match, or a 1941 Johnson that's been drilled and tapped for a scope, or a 1903 A3 Springfield that's been sporterized, or anything that's been refinished, anything along those lines. Now, I can kind of sense this a lot more in my store than I can over the internet, but you can typically spot these sort of interactions before they even happen. And it's typically a customer who calls ahead of time, or they walk in and they say, I've got, you know, a really rare, you know, World War II Nazi, you know, the term Nazi is usually thrown around, Nazi, you know, Mauser rifle. And it's all matching, and, you know, it's a, you know, blah, 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 and they're sort of, you know, talking it up, and usually I'm really excited, cool, it's an all matching, you know, World War II Mauser, this is going to be great to see, and then you look at it and you realize it's a Russian capture that's been refinished, and the serial numbers have actually been electric penciled, and yes, they're matching, but that's called force matching. And you know that they've been online and they've looked at matching Mausers sell for $2,000 to $3,000, but that's not what they have. And then trying to explain that, getting through this sort of the bubble that people already have the impression that you're trying to somehow cheat them out of their gun by explaining that it is not quite what they thought it was when they brought it in, therefore it's worth a fraction of what they thought it was worth. Typically when those interactions start happening, a lot of times, if I'm looking at something like that, I will ask, you know, this is again a person, what are you looking to get for this? Well, I've seen them sell on Gunbroker for $2,000 to $3,000. And I think, okay, this conversation isn't going to go too well. Typically, I might just say, well, I'm gonna pass on this. Not really looking for this right now. Or a lot of times, and I'll gauge it. Typically, is I'll try to explain. Yes, this would be worth $2,000 to $3,000 if it were original, but it's not for these reasons. But again, when somebody comes in expecting to get a $2,000 or $3,000 check for a Mauser, and you're trying to explain it's really a $700 or $800 Russian capture, it's hard to sort of divert people into that, especially when you, the guy trying to buy the gun, is the one telling them that. So usually heavily modified firearms like that, those are the ones that, when I make an offer on them, I usually get accused of, lowballing or not being forthright with the value, or, things kind of go sideways typically on those. Also, when it comes to surplus firearms that have been sold on the internet at incredibly inflated prices, I'm not going to name some of the online vendors who do this, but we've seen over the past 2 or 3 years some of the African firearms that have come in looking really, really rough, import marked and everything, being sold for well over what much better condition rifles are selling for at the same time on GunBroker. So I've made some offers on firearms that people have bought from those sites, and of course, because they paid a lot of money for them, it stands to reason that they would assume that their rifle is worth that, and then oftentimes it's really not, especially when I go to resell it, and I'm not going to sell a sewer pipe looking rifle for twice what they're selling for on GunBroker. I'm just not going to do that. But anyway, there's usually a lot of disagreement in those areas, especially when it comes to those surplus firearms. There's such a wide array of what creates value in those. And there's very little details that if you're not a collector and if you're not really familiar with that, you may not know those details. And it's especially hard to listen to the guy explaining those details to you when you know that guy is trying to buy the gun from you. So usually don't see eye to eye on a lot of those as well. And those are some of the deals that I miss out on as well. So again, I always stress to people, if you're going to get into historic, firearm collecting, make sure you understand exactly what you're getting into. Try and find somebody you trust when you're looking to buy, to get information from as to what they think the value is. I have plenty of customers who call me on stuff like this, who send me links to auctions or different ads on the internet asking my opinion as to the authenticity of the markings or is the description accurate. So a lot of people reach out to me, and again, if you're watching and you're looking up buying something like that, reach out to me as well, and I'll be happy to try and authenticate some of that stuff for you and give you an idea of where I think the market really is on some of those items. But anyway, guys, that is my list of items. Again, if you work at or own a gun store, I would be happy to hear your guys' thoughts on this. If you agree or disagree with my list, to know if your area is any different than mine. If you have a firearm that you've tried to sell that fits into one of these categories and you've had a hard time selling it, these are just some of my insights into that, as some of the reasons as to what the other dealers may be thinking when they're looking at your firearm. And if you're thinking about buying something that fits into one of these categories, just think about the potential resale value. Hopefully that gives you guys just some insights. Again, I am just one gun store owner. There's a lot of us out there, so get different opinions when you're selling or buying something, as always. But I'm going to leave you guys off there. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.